Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Richest Men in Town podcast. I'm Mike Freeman, and along with my good friend and co-host Tyler Gould, we're excited to welcome you to our little podcast project. Tyler and I are just a couple of middle-aged husbands and dads driven to live our best lives. We want to be better every day, so here we'll be sitting down with great people. Not famous people, but great people that we admire, to learn their secret to living the rich life. Probably not the rich life you're thinking of. Our guests come in humbled and surprised at the invitation and hopefully leave feeling proud and grateful, realizing just how good they really have it. So pull up a chair, stay a while, and raise a glass with us as we toast our guests to the richest men in town. Tyler Gould, Michael Druey just came in and changed our lives. Pops, Grandpa Mike, right? Goes by many titles. He comes in. He drops it. What are you taking away from our time with Grandpa Mike?
The guy, I love him, man. He was fun to talk to, super insightful. You know, one of the things that he said that really struck me, and I think it struck me because I'm the opposite, right? He says when he walks in a room, he carries peace. I walk into a room, I carry chaos. Like, that's sort of my function, right? So I thought, man. But in all kidding aside, I really felt like he did talk about carrying peace, and he really kind of projects that when you're having a conversation.
That's his intent, right? That's his intent. He walks into the room and he wants to have that certain show up of a believer, right? He wants in his interactions with other folks, and it goes back, right? So we make some references that are legendary in this episode. Sandy Koufax. We got a Sandy Koufax story for you.
Columbo,
man. Right? Hee-haw.
Hee-haw.
Grandpa Jones from Hee-haw changes Michael's life. And so, hinge moments come at us lots of different shapes, lots of different forms. But Michael tonight was sincere, and you could feel the intentionality that he's living his life with.
Yeah, he one of the things that Michael touched on throughout the entire time we were together was the importance of relationships. He talks about the importance of relationships with God, talks about the importance of his relationship with the people that he loves and that are part of his life, and even just the people that he has a cursory interaction with. Michael really wants to dive into that. And so I loved it. I thought that he was impactful. I took a bunch of notes, and I'm excited for everyone else diving into season 4 to hear a little bit of Michael. And anytime someone drops hee-haw, your ears gotta perk up, right?
Yeah. And the cool thing is there's this reluctance about his story, right? Like he says, I wasn't looking, right? God came and got me.
Yeah.
I just dig that, because I think that there's a lot of folks that are going to be able to relate. Yeah. They're going to be able to relate to the changes that he makes, and just the flood of, he's very mindful of people in his life that are bearing fruit.
Yeah.
And he calls them his spiritual fathers.
Yeah.
Almost like a mentor. And I'm looking for and that's so Richest Men in Town, right? Because that's the whole point. We're either eyes open looking at people in our lives, or we're inviting guests to say, hey, look around in your lives, and who's doing it right, send them our way. We'll put a mic in their face and we'll record for a couple of hours, and we're going to learn some things. And that's the irony of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was fantastic. I'm grateful for Derek Anderson for his collecting of people, right? Mm-hmm. And his willingness to share that collection with us, because there's been some gems that we've had over the last several months because of that relationship with Derek. So, you talked about the coaching tree in football, and this, we seem to be having the same thing going on with Derek and his list of people he wants us to talk to. But boy, I couldn't get enough of Michael tonight.
Yeah. And, true change sticks.
Yeah.
And you see that in the life that Michael's still living, man. Michael, keep going, right? Yeah. To Michael, to Sharon, to the kids, to everybody in Michael's life. I gotta say, if I'm having a bad day, I'd love to come across in my path Michael Druey, because he's going to see his dealing. He's going to see it dealing, and he's not going to be okay with just walking by.
Right.
He's going to show up and he's going to step into your life, and he's going to let you know that he sees you. And it's a lesson learned from Grandpa Jones.
Gosh, hee-haw, man.
Hee-haw, all the things you need to learn.
It all comes back to hee-haw. Yeah.
It all goes back to TV. So, hey, partner. You see what I did there?
I did, yeah. Partner. That was good, yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Hey, but no, honestly, I enjoyed tonight. You know, we talk about midweek church, and that's what our time with Michael was. It is a reminder about relationships. He calls Heavenly Father Dad.
Yeah, I thought I was,
with all the reverence, with all the sanctity that we hold for God, but with the tenderness of Dad. And, you know, as a father, that just gets to me. And then he talks about his dad and what his dad's been through. Anyways, keep your powder dry, Mike Freeman. Richest Men in Town season 4 is rolling. Michael Druey, thank you for the way that you showed up, and thank you for the way that you poured into our hearts. And the bottom line is, Tyler, if it's changing us as we're listening, maybe it's going to do some good to the folks that are out there supporting the program. So to everybody, thank you for all the love that you're sending us on the Richest Men in Town. It is so good to be back with season 4. Lots of folks reaching out to us saying that they missed us, man. They missed us. Who knew?
It's good to be missed. You know?
It's good to be missed. Good to be missed. So we really hope that you take out that pen, take out that pad of paper, take some notes from the rich life that is Michael Druey on this episode of the Richest Men in Town. We're really pressing our luck. We're pressing our luck.
We are, but you know what? The thing that's interesting is that we've said this many times. Like people just that are living a rich life, they're surrounding themselves with people like that, right? I mean, that's how you get there, right? That's how you kind of get to this point where you feel like I'm willing to make some changes and progress, because you've got other people around you that are willing to do the same thing. So I have no doubt that Derek Anderson is once again putting us on to someone who is going to make an impact tonight.
Well, I'm listening to Adam Grant, our boy. I think we're Adam Grant fans.
Yeah.
Adam Grant's got a podcast, and he is talking about how change happens. And I think that as co-hosts of a podcast called Richest Men in Town, where we're trying to make some changes in our own lives and maybe inspire other people to make some changes, you know, this idea, he says, so many of us think change is about thinking and analyzing and making changes. And his take on it is change happens when someone sees something, when they feel it, and that feeling compels them to change.
Yeah. So right? This is interesting.
I kind of dig that.
Let me tell you about something. I think I shared this with you the other day. So I got an email like a week or so ago from someone that I had talked to 10 years ago, right? I mean, literally 10 years ago. My daughter, Sydney, was playing soccer. She tried out for a competitive soccer team. And the coach, good guy, came up to us and said, hey, we'd like to have Sydney as part of this team. And we said, hey, we're excited. This would be great. But we don't play on Sundays. And he said, okay, well, I appreciate you guys sharing that. And so this isn't a good team for her. And we shook hands. We went our separate ways. Right. So I get this email, and it's this coach. And he says, I've been thinking about this conversation that we had 10 years ago. And it's been part of what, it's been rattling around my brain. And as in my journey, trying to get closer to God, I've been looking at this and analyzing this for some time. And I just wanted to say thank you, blah, 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 blah. But it goes to your point, right?
No. Back up. You're being. There's some pieces you're missing, because I owe you a couple of nickels, because I've told this story to a couple of people, right? Because the idea is like, Andy Morgan. People are always watching. They're always listening, and they're like, right now, you may be taking a stance, and it's like people around you are like, what? Why is that guy taking this stance? But the notion of now he uses your words to him as he teaches other people about how to put God first in your life and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, if he doesn't email you that, you have no idea.
No idea.
That those conversations are even happening.
Right.
You were just in that space standing up and like, this is what I believe. This is what I'm raising my family on. This is who we are to the bone.
Right.
Circumstances be damned. This is what we're going to do come what may.
Yeah.
Love that.
I love it too. And I love that I feel like it goes back to your point, right? It's not necessarily that we're analyzing, but it's that we're feeling something, and then that something pushes us to act, right? And I love this example of this email because it was 10 years in the making, right? And sometimes we can hear something and somebody can say something to us, or they can be an example to us, and we notice it, and that thing will crop up every once in a while. I've had those experiences where I think about it like, shoot, here I am doing this, and I remember so-and-so did this, and that's really what I want to be. And then, but it's that timing thing, eventually we get to that point where like, yeah, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah. But that desire I want to be, right? That thing that I want to be. Yeah. Like the key is to go through this life. And we talked a little bit about this, before on that post-truth world. There's a temptation to go through and not be seeking for who you want to be.
Yeah.
Because right now, like, who cares?
It's so ambiguous, right?
Who cares?
There's no definition or boundary.
Why try? What's the point, right? There's no truth. There's no ideal. There's no example. It's like, I'm just trying to get by, or I'm just trying to, raise decent kids that won't go to prison or something. I don't know.
Right. I just want to be a good person.
Yeah.
What's the, what are the defining things that make a person good?
But the cool thing is when you kind of shine that light and say, this is truth. This isn't Tyler Gould truth.
Yeah.
This is truth independent of the Gould family. And we're trying to live in alignment with it. Somebody sees that, puts it in the back of their brain, and is like, who do I want to be? Oh, I kind of liked how that guy took a stand.
Yeah.
Stand for something, right?
Stand for something, right? Absolutely. And needless to say, we've invited him to come on the show with us, and we're working on that. So, but
of course, man, of course.
Yeah. But
let me tell you, I had a cool experience, and I won't name drop because this is a future guest as well. I've been trying to get this guy, Tyler, right? I've been trying to get this guy on the podcast forever. We'll just say one of the founding guests from our podcast dropped his name in his episode. So ever since then, I've been trying to get this guy. I go to this breakfast the other day.
Yeah.
I sit down at a table. I'm having a conversation with this guy. I don't know him. The thing's about to start, and he makes a comment or something, and I kind of joke like, so obviously you're not from around here, trying to maybe get at like, who are you and what's your role here, right? I didn't know he was the speaker. So as soon as I say that, we kind of chuckle. The person emceeing the event gets the thing started, and they announce him as the speaker, and he gets up and drops his, as soon as I hear the name, I'm like, oh, this is the guy.
Yeah, right.
This is the guy, right?
Right.
And as soon as he's done and he finds out my name, he comes running up to me, and he's like, I said, man, that little 15, 20-minute keynote you just did, that's my podcast times 2 hours, man. Let's do this. Right. And he's like, I'm sorry. There's been a million things going on. I've been meaning to get back to you. So it was like,
I love it, man.
Love connection, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 and 2,
That is awesome, man.
It was so cool. And then I go to the next meeting, and another guy I've been trying to get is there. And I'm like, I've never met that person. Hey, you take me over there, introduce me to that guy. We make connections, and then I walk away. I'm like, oh, by the way, like one more thing, right? Like who was that detective that always did that? Monk or something, right?
Columbo.
Oh, Columbo.
Are we going old school, man? I think we right there with the Rolodex, dude.
Columbo. One more thing. I got this podcast, right? So the future is bright. The future is bright for guests for season 4 of The Richest Men in Town.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good stuff happening. So I'm excited about Michael Druey tonight and having him on the show and learning some things from him. You know, I mean, I feel like we were able to spend some time with Derek, and Derek, you know, I took a lot of notes. I loved the conversation that Derek then introduced us, you know, to he's that list is growing. And
yeah.
Quite frankly, I feel like
it's kind of like one of those coaching trees in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, that batch of guests is coming from one source named Derek Anderson. I mean,
and you know, there's a little bit of pressure that's involved with that because you don't want to be the one guy that washes out. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be that guy. So you know,
let's get this guy in here. What do you think?
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Okay, I'm gonna let this guy in, and we'll get this party started. But you're right. I mean, we don't want him to feel any undue pressure that comes with being a friend of Derek Anderson. Right.
That's right.
Michael Druey, welcome to The Richest Men in Town. Sorry to keep you waiting. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing fantastic. You've met Tyler and I'm Mike, and we're excited to have an opportunity to jump into your rich life. We were just commenting on Derek Anderson has given us a couple of home runs, and he must be having some. He must be doing some great association, hanging out with some great guys, and we didn't want you to feel any pressure coming in on his tree having to deliver, but we're excited to learn from you tonight.
Well, I'm the grandpa in the whole equation. Derek calls me Pops, and I'm proud to introduce him as my oldest son. So
I love that.
There we go. How long you known Derek?
Oh, it's been about 12 years, I think.
Okay.
He was a good friend of my son. My son's an RN, and I think they kind of met through the medical field, and didn't take much time spending with Derek to know what kind of a man he was. So my wife and I always introduce him as our oldest boy, and we're always glad to see him.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, well, we love ourselves from Derek Anderson. I know him from I was an administrator at his kid's school, and he would be volunteering and helping out. So it didn't take me long at all either to find out what kind of guy he is and what kind of family he's raising. So hey, so Michael, when the invitation goes out to be on a podcast called The Richest Men in Town, what thoughts come to your mind?
Oh, what am I going to say to these guys? I'm just an average guy, you know. But when I think about it, I am pretty rich. I do have a lot of things to be grateful for. I just think the concept of The Richest Man in Town, it was a neat title, and I was interested in finding out more about it.
Well, let me just tell you, while we had you in the waiting room, we were chatting a little bit. Tyler had a recent experience where he held the line on something that him and his family were trying to hold as a priority, right? In this particular case, it was sports on Sunday. He had a daughter who was playing competitive soccer, and the coach was like, man, we'd love to have her on the team. And the Goulds have a house rule, family rule, right? That we don't play sports on Sunday. In their way, Tyler, right? It's your effort to put God first, and you know, and we're not knocking families that play sports on Sundays. I think
no judgment.
But that was their rule. Well, the coach kind of walked away like, dang it, what was that? He didn't get the player he wanted. And he's like, that's kind of, you know, bouncing around in his head. Well, this coach reaches out like 12 years later.
A little over about 11 years.
11 years later, and says, hey, just so you know, I never forgot that. And now in my own walk with the Lord and trying to grow my own faith, I think about the example you set all those years ago, and you impacted me. And I actually share your story as I teach people about Jesus and trying to put him first. And I'm just thinking, Michael, do you have any experience where you were just being you and you were just trying to be the best you could be, and it ended up having an impact on somebody that you maybe weren't even trying to influence.
Boy, howdy, you're making me dig pretty deeply.
Leaving the script right away. Sorry about that.
I'm going to have to roll that around in my head a little bit. No, that's kind of interesting. I can remember growing up. I grew up in Los Angeles, and just a little background on me. I'm a mid-70s baby boomer, been retired for about 12 years and just kind of living out my golden years, as they call them. But I can remember
retired from what?
I was a machinist.
Oh, okay.
I made aircraft type stuff, and then when I retired, I just kind of continued. I make musical instruments, so just have still continue to put things together with my hands. But I can remember as a young man that the Dodgers had just come to LA from Brooklyn, and they had this pitcher called Sandy Koufax, and Sandy was a lefty, and I was left-handed, so Sandy Koufax became my idol, you know, as a young junior high age kid. And I can remember a World Series game where it was Sandy's rotation to come up and pitch, and it was on Rosh Hashanah, I think. It was on a Jewish high holiday. And he told him, I'm not going to pitch. And that impacted me, that at the highest level that you can come, and certainly an individual who's considered an all-time great left-hander. And his conviction was, no, this is a holy day and I'm going to honor it. And that stuck with me for a long time. And so the way that has impacted me, I want to represent. I want people to know I'm a Christian, not because I wear jewelry, you know, a golden cross, or carry a big Bible, or have a bunch of bumper stickers on my car. I want people to know that when I enter the room, there's a difference made because I carry peace. I carry God's shalom, and that to me is a goal. You know, I just want to represent. You know.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that, Michael, and Mike and I were talking about this. You know, the experience that I had. You know, this person was kind enough to reach out via email and mention that, and that's great. But we probably have experiences like that every day. And I know that people have made impact on my life, and I replay certain things in my head that people gave me as an example, or words that they gave me that I haven't said to them. Hey, thank you for sharing this, you know. But it's those experiences are part of who I am. And I love the idea of you. I love that idea of carrying peace.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that how cool is it that people, when they come into a room, they can see something different. And I just think that there's, you know, again, I got an email from someone that was cool, and it was neat to hear that. But I hope that there's a lot more people out there that have said, you know what, shoot, I had an interaction with Tyler, or with Mike, or with Michael, and it impacted me. It changed my trajectory on some level. And because that list for me is very long, and the few people that I've actually had the opportunity to express my gratitude to is very small. Right. So,
well, I think to our millions of listeners, Michael, minus millions, but I would invite all of us to do something about that list, right? Like, I think if we do have some people that we appreciate the peace that we feel when we're around them, right? Or we appreciate the way that the thing that they taught us, or maybe the way they spoke hard truth to us, right? In between rounds.
Right.
Yeah.
Reach out.
For sure. Well, I had another experience, and this one changed me a lot, and it would happen, my goodness, 40 years ago. I'm a musician, and I played in a band in it would have been 1979, 1980, and we did old-timey music, which is Civil War vintage and before, fiddle tunes. We had a couple of hammered dulcimers. I don't know if you're familiar with that instrument. I played guitar, and we had a banjo player, we were doing a music festival in Mountain View, Arkansas. And one of the headliners for this festival was Grandpa Jones. Maybe you remember Grandpa Jones from the Hee Haw show when we were kids.
I
You guys
do
are a little
remember
younger
that.
than me,
Yeah.
so you would have been quite a bit younger. But
Well, we went to Columbo in the waiting room. We didn't go to Hee Haw.
Hee Haw. I remember Hee Haw as a kid. My dad
yeah.
watching Hee Haw, man.
Yeah,
and when
that's
you
a
remember
classic.
Grandpa Jones,
Yes.
Yeah.
okay, well, he was the headliner at this music festival. And I remember I'd gone to the restroom or something, and I was walking down a long hallway, nobody else there. I hear some footsteps, and Grandpa Jones is walking towards me. Well, I've kind of got this grow up in LA mentality at this point. I'm just kind of looking at the ground, not really paying attention. He got about 10 feet from me, and he said, "How are you, young man?" And it hit me like a punch. For some reason, I just thought, I'm just staring at my feet. I've got an opportunity to greet another individual and somebody that's famous to boot, and I don't take advantage of it. And so at this point in my life, this 50 years later, even when I'm taking a walk, I wave at the cars that come by. If I'm someplace and I see somebody sitting alone at a table, I say, why are they sitting alone at that table? I'm just going to say hi to them. And it just brings a lot. It brings a lot. And I can't even remember the number of people who said, hey, I needed that. Thank you. Thank you for just acknowledging me.
I love that. Yeah.
So would you say, Michael, that you do that because of that exchange with Grandpa Jones?
Absolutely. No question.
It's so funny, Mike, because you think about that, like, I'll share a quick experience. I knew someone named Ron Clove, and he told me one time we were walking down the hallway of a church building, and he was kind of a leader and a role model for me, and we were talking about, he was a JAG in the Navy, and we're walking through this hall, and he stopped and he bent over and picked up a little scrap of paper that was on the floor in the hall, and he said, something to the effect of, leadership is, you can do a lot of things for leadership, but being the one who bends down and picks up the little piece of trash, that's leadership. And I thought, I've never forgot that. Every time I'm walking anywhere, I see a piece of trash, I pick it up and throw it away. Right? I love those moments. Those are great.
But see, and here's the thing about the life-changing moment, or like character defining, at least, right? Like Grandpa Jones is just being him.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right. Grandpa Jones didn't wake up and say, I'm going to change a young man's life by going out of my way and saying, how are you, young man? That's who he was. And that's probably who he was everywhere he went. Yeah. But in that exchange, Tyler, you were talking about that trajectory, right? How we meet people and how they are when they're done with us. That's the game.
Absolutely.
Are they on higher ground? Or did we alter their trajectory with a little bit of, whether it's 50 years in our life or 30 seconds with Grandpa Jones, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't even stop and pause to talk to each other. I just kind of acknowledged him and staggered down the hallway thinking, oh man, what did I just do?
Right.
But it has affected me for the rest of my life.
I love that.
People need to feel seen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Mike, I love the idea of something that's small like that that we can be open enough to let that change parts of us, right? I mean, Michael, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you were a good guy at that point in time, right? But that small lesson helped you to change something else about you. And I love that, just adopting and recognizing, hey, shoot, you know what? I could be better at acknowledging people. Or, I just think that's such a powerful thing.
See, that goes back before you jumped in, Michael. I was just talking about a podcast I'd listened to by Adam Grant. The podcast is called the Work Life Podcast. And he was just talking about how change happens, right? How do we bring about change? And it's not necessarily a thinking, analyzing. It's a seeing, hearing, feeling something.
Mhm.
And when we see or we hear something and it moves us and we feel that movement, that propels us to change. And that's a perfect example. You felt something when he said that to you.
Yeah, it's something on the inside for sure.
Yeah, on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to a change that lasts your whole life. Right?
Yep. It still affects me to this day.
Would you call that a hinge moment?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that concept that little
it's something
things.
that- it's like dominoes falling. It's affected me. Even to this day, I still go out of my way to make eye contact. If I see a police officer or a fire department or something, I always make it a point to thank them. Teachers, people that have invested something in somebody else. I just think it's important for me to recognize that and encourage that.
Love it.
Yeah, I do too. And what's cool about that is this brief moment with Grandpa Jones in the hallway of this venue, and then you moving forward kind of adopt this attitude of making eye contact and thanking people. And it's just like you said, it's these dominoes that fall and other people are impacted and they adopt certain attributes. And I just love it. That's
Tyler,
how we
what's
get
that?
where we need to be.
Tyler, what's that story you told me a couple of times that I collect people?
Yeah,
Right?
I'm friends with someone and they were moving away and she said to me, Tyler, I'm a collector of people and I just don't make relationships and let them disappear out of my life. So I'm going to be back in touch with you. And we are in touch and we communicate. And I love that idea of being a collector of people because to me, those moments are powerful, right? And those relationships are meaningful. And so I love that idea of being a collector of people.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just ironic that we know Michael because Michael is going around connecting with and collecting people. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Somehow you made an impression on Derek Anderson and Derek's dropping your name to some sketchy podcast hosts and we're harassing you. So.
Well, I did ask him, who are these guys?
Yeah, our family won't even claim us. So, know.
Well, I get that.
Michael,
well, hey, so I was listening to this guy speaking at this breakfast the other day, and he mentioned something. I'm going to throw it out to you. He said, if you went to the hospital today, would you have somebody to come visit you? And he said, there's research that shows, do you have 20 people that would come visit you? Because that is the difference between thriving in life or being impoverished in life.
20's the line? Because I'm at around 7.
20.
I got some work to do.
Like if they heard you were down, would do you have the village? Do you have the support where 20 people would come to you and say, hey, what you need, right? I'm thinking of It's a Wonderful Life. And at the end of that movie, right?
I think pretty close to that. I know I've got quite a few people who would come in person, and then a lot of people who would Facebook me.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm praying for you. But for me, it's not exactly a fair question. My youngest son is a ICU nurse, and he's been at the local hospital here in Reading, Mercy, for 25 years. So I know lots of people at the hospital. And I was in the hospital here a year or so ago, and I just got a stream of, Derek's wife works there, and so she'd come by. And so I've got a lot of people in the healthcare field. So I think I might have hit close to 20.
Well, Tyler, our good friend Mitch Lowther, I couldn't get in to visit that guy because there was like a take a number deli style out the door. Yeah. But it's what you give.
Yeah.
It's what you give. And in those circumstances, that's what comes back tenfold.
But yeah, I like, Mike, you were kind of hinting at the the similarities between It's a Wonderful Life, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
if you would have asked George Bailey, do you have 20 people that would care that you were broke and about to be arrested, right? He would probably have told you no.
Right.
I've got 3 or 4, but at the end of that, you see this mass output.
Well, and that's the whole premise, right? I think the
Right.
world would be better off if I was never born.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't see 20 people that value me.
Right.
And it's like, well, George Bailey, go get some new eyes because they're there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I don't like hearing you say that because it's not the truth.
Right.
I know you've affected way more than that.
That's
Now,
right.
whether or not some of your students would come see you or not, I don't know. But I know you've made a change. And I look at Jack's son Grant and I go, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, I'd love to kind of rewind things a little bit and go back to your roots and maybe hear a little bit about your upbringing and your mom and dad and their influence on you as you were growing up.
Okay, well,
I can't wait.
Boys.
And I can't wait. I can't wait to go back because we've been on the East Coast with some guests that have taken us back to New York and New Jersey. And I cannot wait to go to an LA that is LA Dodgers are the new headline in town, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like that just sounds like a magical time.
And Vin Scully was
Vin,
right? We just
Vin
lost
Scully,
Vin Scully.
Jerry Doggett, you bet. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was a good man then.
Yeah.
Well, I usually go back to what I heard Popeye say one time. He said, when I was born, I was very young. So just kind of start there.
Let's start there.
My folks were divorced when I was 4, I think. And my mom remarried, and she married a doctor. And I had some significant health problems. So my stepfather and I got off to kind of a rocky start, because he was the guy that was always giving me shots and giving me pills. And my dad was the guy that came on every Sunday at 10 o'clock and took me to a baseball game or an amusement park. So there was kind of this rift that developed. And over the years, my stepfather and I had some pretty tough times. And he was abusive, some physical, but more than physical was verbal.
Mm-hmm.
He was really rough verbally, and I really believe that that's the worst kind of abuse. If somebody smacks you, the bruise will go away, the physical wound will heal. If somebody breaks your heart, it doesn't heal so easy. It takes special stuff to heal those wounds. So when growing up in LA and seeing my dad every weekend. Now, my dad was a World War II veteran, and I think he lied to get into the Army at age 17. It was just after Pearl Harbor, and like most young men, he enlisted, and they sent him to the Philippines, and he was captured at Corregidor by the Japanese and spent several years in an internment camp. So that really shaped my father's life. And I never once heard him raise his voice. He was just a gentle man, and my stepfather was quite the opposite. He was very vocal, very loud, very verbal. So I've got this dichotomy that I'm dealing with. And when I got to a point that I was big enough to fight back, my stepfather and I kind of had an armed truce. And then come the 60s, and I graduated high school in 66. And I was just a hippie's hippie at that point. I let my hair grow, and a typical day for me was taking amphetamines to get my eyes open and get going, and then smoking a joint to cut the edge off. And I'd go about my day. And I was, at one point, I was married, 1 kid, getting stoned every day. And I was in law enforcement. I was a state humane officer doing animal control. And animal regulation officer. And I thought everything was just fine. Thought everything was great. And one of my training officers I thought he was a real weirdo. He was one of these Jesus freak guys. And so he would say, "Hey, I'm trying to memorize some scripture. Will you see if I remember this right?" And he handed me a list of scripture. Well, I can see the smile on your face, Mike.
That's a good move.
Scripture. He was just baiting the hook, you know.
Yeah.
And I was raised in a very liturgical church. And I was raised a Roman Catholic, and I don't mean in any way to be critical of Catholicism. I won't do that. I'm just saying what my experience was.
Right.
And my experience, I knew the prayers to say at certain times, and I knew when to stand up. I understood at that time they were still doing the church service in Latin. So I knew all the responses. I knew all of the accoutrements in the church. And it was hard for me. It was really hard for me. And in 1972, my wife made me go to church. I just said, "Okay, just if you quit bugging me, I'll go to church with you." And this preacher was talking about God as somebody who's alive and somebody who you can have a personal relationship with. And it was like somebody flipped a switch in my heart. And what I realized was, as a Roman Catholic, for me, and once again, I'm not being critical of Catholicism, but for me, I knew the house of God, but I did not know the God of the house. Mm. And that evening at a little Foursquare church in Escondido, California, somebody introduced me to the living God, and it became a relationship at that point, not religion. And so, you know, here's this burnout, dope smoking hippie, and just all of a sudden, I've got something else that makes me happy every day. And I'd like to say I was just instantly perfect. That wasn't the case, but all of the drugs just lost their sparkle because I had something that was concrete and real. And so, you know, the next 50 years now has just been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of heartbreak, but an awful lot of good things. And God's never left me. He's made a promise he'd never leave me or turn his back on me, and that's proven to be the case. So, you know, from an old hippie burnout to a few years back spending about 14 years as a chaplain going into juvenile hall and into him in Shasta County. So I kind of did the circuit.
Wow.
Well, you know, I'm thinking of those verses in Luke where two people build a house, or two people build houses. One builds it on the rock, one builds it on the sand.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife probably understood that early marriage and that early family was on sand.
Yep. For sure. I thought everything was just fine.
Have you ever played that game of like, what would life have been if she didn't make you go to church that day?
Well, I've thought about it, and I have to believe that God would have found another way to find me.
Come on,
because
right?
I certainly was not looking for him.
Yeah.
And looking back, I can see several times where he was knocking on the door. When I was doing juvenile hall ministry, I call all the kids in jail. I call them my little knuckleheads in jail, because I felt like that's what my job was to knock on their foreheads and say, "Come on, you don't have to get stuck in this loop. You don't have to believe what people say to you when they tell you you're just a juvenile delinquent. You're not. You're something that's valuable. You're something that's valuable to God. And if I can show you that, then you don't have to be in this loop, in and out of jail until you age out." So I know God
identity,
was
right?
Yep. So that's where I found who I was, and I'd love to say that I've just been perfect at it, but I'll stub my toes and said a lot of things that came from me and not from the Holy of Holies over the years. I have a tendency to stir things up, and I stir the pot sometimes, going with both barrels blazing when I should say, well, wait a minute, let's take a little look at this first. Let's change this scenario a little bit.
Well, I don't want to get out of sequence. And I love you taking us back to that moment in that church building, and you can probably picture it in your mind's eye like it was yesterday.
Yep.
Right. But can I fast forward a little bit? I am curious, the chaplaincy in the juvenile hall, like, where did that come from? Well, was that something that you felt called to do, or
I asked myself the same question at the time. Where did that come from? A friend of mine called me and said, God's given me several spiritual fathers growing up. Because when I became a Christian, my stepfather and we began to mend our relationship, but it was still kind of rocky. And so God gave me mature Christian men, and men that when I looked at them, I saw fruit. I saw, I can respect that. And this one guy, his name was Don Stetler. And what Don used to say was, I hope that if it ever becomes illegal to be a Christian, that there'll be enough evidence to convict me. And that's something that has stuck with me for all these years. So one of these gentlemen in my life, we were living in Las Molinas, and he said, hey, I'm going into juvenile hall. Why don't you come with me? Now, part of me is saying, I don't want to do that. But I respected Tim enough that I said, okay, I'll go with you. So we went, we got no training. They said, here's how you get in. First you do this, and then you sign this little book, and you got an hour, and then you sign the book out. That was a total training, nothing else. And they bring us into this, they call it a pod, which is a little room with cells all the way around the outside, and then tables bolted to a cement floor for the kids to sit on. Brought us in there and said, okay, you got an hour. Well, oh, geez, what am I going to talk about? So I went in twice with Tim just because he was my friend. And then the third time I was going to meet him there, and he didn't show up. So I'm thinking, well, what do I do now? And that just kind of snowballed from there. And what I ended up doing, just kind of trusted the Lord for something to say. Sometimes the kids that ask questions, that would open a door. But right off the bat, I realized, Dad, I need to have some insight into these kids. And what I want to do is I want to see them the way you see them. And I believe what the Lord put on my heart was that I was to look at them as if they were my grandchildren. And that was pivotal. So from that point on, all the boys I called son, and all the girls I called hun. And I let them know right from the beginning, this is the way it's going to be. I'm Grandpa Mike, and this is the way I'm going to see you. And I wouldn't let them tell me what they were locked up for, because I didn't want to revert back to the judgmental state that sometimes we are when we hear these things that criminals do. We get judgmental, and some of it's good, but usually it's something that separates. So I didn't want to know what little Johnny got arrested for. And that really made all the difference in the world. So from there, we just, sometimes I didn't go in 3 times a week because the staff just didn't have anybody that was willing to stick with it. And well, here we are, 12 plus years later, and every once in a while I'll be at Walmart and I'll hear, Grandpa Mike, turn around and he'll be one of my young kids. They're not, I've had to retire over the last few years, so they're not little anymore. Most of them are young and have families now. But planted some seeds and had overall an enjoyable experience.
Wow.
I think it's just funny, Tyler, that we're hanging out with Grandpa Mike, and he's talking about how he was blessed with these spiritual fathers and he saw fruit in their lives. And I'm just wondering who would call Grandpa Mike that in their lives right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's
Right?
quite a list, right? For 12
Yeah.
years. 12 years. I love how 3 days turns into 12 years. And I'm
I just
curious.
kept going.
Yeah, I'm curious, Michael. What did that do for you during that time that you were with these young people?
Well, I found it was something that I looked forward to. When I first started going in, there were a lot of different people that would come. We had church on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And it was usually just an hour slot. After the staff got used to me, they'd give me some leeway. But when I first started, there were probably a dozen people doing it. And I found out right away, because the kids would ask me questions. They'd say, oh, well, preacher so-and-so said this on Sunday. What about? And one of the things that I realized was that they were telling these kids that they needed to get their act cleaned up before they could become a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And they were being judgmental. And so I just started praying about it. And I said, Dad, these kids don't need that. They don't need that. And one by one, all of these people that were feeding the kids judgment and performance-based religion dropped out of the program. So for a while, it was pretty much just me, and there was one other staff member. And then over time, he gave me a few people that were just loving the kids. They were just coming in and loving on them. And that's what the kids needed. That's what they needed. And so, for me, I think that the Grandpa Mike thing is a direct result of the Grandpa Jones encounter. Because I often thought of him, because that was a persona that he put on in his younger days. And then when he got to be gray beard and everything, he didn't have to wear makeup anymore. Well, when I started, I was 65 or in that range, and I've been gray since I was 40, so I didn't have to put on any Grandpa Mike makeup.
I love it. Can I ask you, Michael? I heard you refer to praying, and you said in your prayer, in describing your prayer, you said Dad.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In reference to God. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that comes from for you?
Well, it comes from relationship. Something that I've come to believe is the Bible is, if I could describe it in one word, I'd say relationship. God wants to be personally related to us. He's the creator. We're created in his image. And so he wants to have a relationship. And if you see the way God's dealing with man develops in the Bible, in Genesis, God walked with Adam. Well, that's face to face. That's friendship. That's relationship. And I'm sure God didn't care if Adam had mud on his feet. It was just a first face-to-face relationship. And I think that's the same thing that Jesus taught. And when he did what he did, paying the price on the cross and then rose from the dead, he wants us to have that kind of a relationship. Now, I don't take it lightly. I'm not flippantly calling him Dad. I have great respect that. Absolutely. I know what I was. I was a hippie burnout. I wasn't looking for him. He came and got me. But I know that he wants to be my father. He wants to be the father that I didn't have because the world robbed me of him. And so I want to have that relationship with him. I also want to have a relationship with you. There may be religious things that we see differently. You know, we may be with one denomination, another denomination. I'm not interested in that because I'm not going to identify you as that. But if I can find common ground, what do we believe that's the same or that's close enough that we can build a relationship? And if we build a relationship, if we get to the place where we can call each other friend, well, then maybe we can branch out and see some things that we disagree in, because we know our friendship is going to keep us together and not be divided over differences of opinion. But to me, it starts with relationship with God. And I know he calls me son. And when he uses my full name, when he says Michael, I sit down and listen in a hurry.
Well, I love that, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I certainly, when you were describing those moments of prayer, I certainly didn't take that as you being flippant. I could sense the reverence and the relationship that you have with God. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, and I made the same note, Tyler, and I was about to ask the question right before you did, or you beat me to it, but like it felt like powerful intention to teach.
Yeah.
Like it felt swimming upstream, and we get that feeling a lot when we're talking to rich people living rich lives. They're not following the masses, right? The masses aren't. They're heading to that wisdom of the world, right? It's the folks that are swimming upstream that have a clear understanding of the nature of God, because we can't be like him if we don't know him. Right. Or if we don't know him, it's that unknown God, right? It's that Mars Hill. It's like,
yep.
The adversary would love for us to not know God, because then we can't strive to be like him. But I love what you were saying. We were created in his image. I love what you were saying to those kids in juvenile hall. Do you understand your identity? Do you understand that these labels that the court system or the justice system have put on you are not who you are? It might be what you did, and there's some, right? Love is accountable, right?
Absolutely.
Love is not sweeping things under the rug and pretending like we don't have things that we need to take care of and some consequences for our actions, but going to them and striking right at the, I'm going to help you see who you are as a son or a daughter of God. And that's going to change everything.
Absolutely. One of the parables that I would try to teach the kids a lot is the one with the treasure that's hidden in a field, and the man wants to buy the field, and he goes and sells everything he has to buy the treasure. And I've heard that preached a lot. And I've heard that preached that the treasure was Jesus. And I've accepted that. But over the years, I've come to believe that the treasure is me, because God the Father sold everything he had. He had his son. He had his beloved son in whom he was well pleased. And he was willing to give up his son's flesh and blood in order to purchase me. I get choked up over that. That's amazing. And so I want the kids to realize that you have value. And then what I try to do from there, because the forgiveness is a big deal. God forgave our sins in Christ and in the blood of Christ, but he asks us to forgive other people. And I see these kids, and they're bitter and they're angry, and they don't seem to understand. They've got legitimate reasons to be bitter and angry. The girls have been abused by their mom's boyfriend, and they've got legitimate reasons to harbor hatred. But forgiveness cuts those ties. Good example, my stepfather, I hated him for years. When I became a Christian, the Lord said, I need you to forgive him. And I said, why? Well, all the stuff he did to me, the stuff he did to my sister, why? And God just kind of worked it in my heart, because I've asked you to, son. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I realized that forgiveness is not an emotion, it's a decision. And so I decided to forgive him. And when I did, I quit having nightmares. I quit getting angry every time I thought about him. And I realized, oh, that's what forgiveness is about. Well, then God took the next step and he said, now I want you to go to him and ask him to forgive you. Now that was much, much harder for me, but then I realized how much it did for me. Then it's got to do something for him. So I did that. I asked him and my mom to forgive me for all of the crazy stuff I did. And that put a change in our relationship. So he and I got to be pretty good friends the last 5 years of his life. So back to talking to the kids, you want to cut any ties that you have and let their problem be their problem. Because bitterness is not going to do you any good. It's going to make you worse and worse. You're going to rot inside. And it's never going to, it's going to affect all of your relationships. And that was one of the primary lessons that I tried to teach the kids. And one of the ways I would look at it, I'd have one of the kids set up dominoes in a row on the desk. When he'd get the line out there, I'd reach over and knock them over. And he'd kind of get a little frustrated. There's one kid in particular I used to pick on all the time because I knew he could take it. And he'd set them up again, and I'd reach over and knock them over. And then I'd say, okay, kids, now I want you to understand something. I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want you to answer it. This is a question I just want you to think about. And that question is, why are you in jail? And when they'd start thinking about it, I'd say, listen, it's not, this last domino is you're getting arrested, but that's not why you're here. You're here because of this first domino. So let's go back to this first domino, this place here that you've got like a splinter, and it's infected and it's inflamed and it's causing all of these other dominoes in your life to fall. Let's see if we can get God to fix this one, because that's what knocked everything else over. And just maybe God will do for you what he did for me and begin standing the dominoes up. And the gap in between, he'll sit in himself, so that now I'm not easily knocked over because I'm supported by God. I'm supported by my dad.
I love it. You've said a couple times, Michael, you've said, I wasn't looking for God, but God came and found me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to you talk about the conversations that you've had with these young people in the juvenile correctional center, and I got to believe that there's a pretty good sized group of people that are probably have the same sentiment that you have. Like, I wasn't looking for God, but God came and found me, and it was through Grandpa Mike who came in and showed some compassion and showed some mercy and showed some grace to us when maybe they didn't feel like they deserved it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I love too that there's a flow to this thing, this discipleship, right? There's a,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, Tyler, our conversation a little while back, I think Andy Morgan said, he heard God, the Lord say, better yourself.
Yeah.
First instructions were stop drinking, and it's like, as we come unto him and as we yoke ourselves to him, these changes flow from that.
Absolutely.
We're not compelled, right? I want to be like him, and therefore I'm looking at my life and I'm looking at the nail that's sticking up is this relationship or this grudge or this contention that I have or this habit that I have. And those nails that stick up become like, that's contrary to the nature of who I want to become, because I want to be like him. So therefore, hey, Dad, can you help me with this thing? Because this thing needs to change.
Yep.
I was struck when you told me early on. I mean, you went into a little more detail just now, but you said, I became a Christian and I started working on my relationship with my stepfather, right? Because that's consistent in that faith. I had a
Yeah.
conversation with somebody, my coworker was like, usually people that are churchy are kind of, my experience is they're kind of judgy. And I don't really see you being judgy. What's that all about? And I'm like, because I'm a wretch.
Right.
I sing Amazing Grace that saved a wretch like me. Like, I'm a mess.
Yeah,
Who am I to judge anybody, right?
absolutely.
But the temptation is there.
Well, a lot of churches kind of teach a performance based. If you do these things, God will love you. Well, that's not biblical. It's just not the way it is. We do these things because He loves us. I wasn't compelled to go into juvenile hall because I thought I needed to do it to please God. I was compelled to go in because these kids didn't have a dad. They didn't have a grandpa. More than once, I got to break the rules. Most juvenile detention facilities are no touch. You can't touch the kids. They can't touch each other. They're real strict about that. And there's more than once that I held a gangbanger in my arms and just let him cry. And that's, I did that because of what God did for me. How could I do any less?
I love that.
Way to stir it up. Way to stir it up, Grandpa Mike.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, take me back. So how did you meet your wife?
Oh boy. Well, Sharon and I have been married 30 years.
I'm picturing you with the long hair.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Right.
I actually had hair.
Okay.
That's kind of gone by the wayside. But actually, my first wife and I moved to Texas and got a divorce, and don't want to go into that. It was just a situation I was handled. And after making a bunch of terrible mistakes and doing a bunch of crazy stuff in my brokenness, one Sunday afternoon, I was taking my boys back to my ex-wife's house because it was time for them to, get ready for school the next day, and my visitation time was over. And Sharon was there because she was a friend of my ex-wife. And the ex-wife introduced us, and Sharon said, you know anybody that is hiring? I'm out of work. I need a job. And as it happened, I did. I was running a quality control department, and I needed a driver. So Sharon came in and interviewed, and and she got the job. So we worked together for a couple of years. Now, I was a Christian then, and so was Sharon, but I'll tell you, I learned some stuff from her. One day she walked in and punched in on the time clock, and there was a machine right next to the time clock, and there was a young man there, and he sneezed or something, and Sharon said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm just not feeling too good." She said, "Well, can I pray for you?" And he said, "Yeah," thinking that she was just going to go off and pray for him. Not Sharon. She stepped up, put a hand on his shoulder, another hand on his forehead, and started praying.
Right there.
I love
When
it.
Sharon prays, you don't quit until she quits. And it may be a while sometimes. but that really taught me something. And to this day, 30 years later, she's well known for meeting somebody at grocery outlet and praying for them in the aisles. And I learned a lot from this blonde, and really blessed to have somebody that hung with me for 30 years.
So how did you convince her to hitch your wagon to you?
Well, I think it was the Lord that did that, because both of us were divorcees and said, you know what, divorce is just too hard. And I just don't want to go through that kind of pain, and don't want to, so it's just me and you, Lord. And Sharon and I got to be good friends. We worked together, so we developed a friendly relationship. And then she became a caregiver for a gentleman with Alzheimer's. And at that point, she didn't have a car, so I'd pick her up on a Friday night and drop her off at a girlfriend's house. And then Sunday afternoon, we'd go to church because we both went to the same church, and then I'd take her home. So we were good friends. And it got to a point where I realized, hey, we're not just good friends, we're best friends. And at that point, God just kind of opened up our hearts, and she'll tell the story a little differently than I will. But basically, I just said, hey, I think the Lord is telling us to get married. What do you think? And so not the most romantic way to get into it, but she said yes. And I tell people the first time I ever kissed Sharon was on our wedding night. When we determined that we were going to take our relationship further, we determined that nothing was going to cloud that. And the kissing was just foreplay, actually. And so we were not going to do that. We wanted to be able to have a relationship based on the fact that we loved each other and we loved the Lord. And that needed to be our foundation. And so first time I ever kissed her was after we said I do. And that was August 4th, it was 30 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Wow, that's so awesome. Michael, given your experiences and your walk of faith, what gives you hope these days?
Okay, hope. Years ago, I started studying the old languages. The Bible wasn't written in English. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew for the most part. And I really don't believe in coincidence. I think God orchestrates stuff. So I stumbled on a CD it was a DVD in a Bible bookstore. Had a big bin with just piles of CDs and DVDs, and they were like 50 cents. They were just trying to get rid of them. And I stumbled upon one that had something about the Dead Sea Scrolls and some historical stuff that I enjoy. So I spent the 50 cents. And I found what it was advertisements for different people's websites. And one was called Living Word Pictures. And this guy was a Hebrew scholar, and he studied the ancient Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew language, the alphabet was the same, but the letters were pictographs. The letters represented something, just like Chinese. So, for example, Shin looks like a W, but the symbol was teeth, and teeth devour things. So what this guy did, he took different common words in Hebrew and showed how the letters, the way they lump together, they have a relationship with each other, and that gives you the meaning of the word. Well, the word hope is pretty interesting. The main word hope just appears in Psalms. And as a matter of fact, the Israeli national anthem is Ha Tikvah. So the word hope is Tikvah. And so when you look at hope, the first letter is Hey, which is a definite article. It means the. The next letter is Tav, which is a cross. It's the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. When it says God put a sign on different things and the angel would pass over them, the word for sign is Tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's a sign of covenant. Next letter is Kuf, which is the back of somebody's head. And if you're looking at the back of somebody's head, you're following them. The next letter is Vav, which is a nail. The nails hold things together. You attach things. If you're going to nail 95 Thesis was nailed on the wall, so nails attach things. And then the last letter in Tikvah is Hey again, which is female ending, and it means what's birthed out of. So the literal meaning of the word hope is the covenant that follows the nail. So God was very purposeful in everything from the beginning. He knew what his son was going to have to go through. He knew what it would take. And he was always trying to give us hope. So when I hear the hope, the reason that I have hope is because it's promised me because of what Jesus did. That's where my hope comes from. And there's a lot of times, let's be real about it. There's times when you're feeling sick, when things seem to be crashing down around you, that you're looking for God. You might even be angry with him. And I can remember a time recently, and this has happened many times since then, when I was just not feeling good. And so I just, Dad, I know what the word says about healing. I'm not feeling good. But Dad, right now, in these circumstances, I just need a cookie. And that's the expression that I used. And I was getting in my truck to go someplace. And when I shut the door, the entire interior of the truck smelled like there was a dozen roses sitting on the front seat. My truck doesn't smell like a dozen roses. But he gave me a cookie. He gave me something to let me know, son, it's not out of control. I've got you in the palm of my hand, and you've got the covenant that follows the nail. I've got you in this. Wow. So, I encourage people when things are going tough, and they're going to get tough. Life is hard sometimes. But you've got a Savior who doesn't leave. He doesn't go away. And he nailed all of that to the cross.
Mike, when you're down, when you're not feeling well, when you're having a day, right? Tyler calls it kicked in the shorts. When life's kicking you in the shorts, is there a place you turn to in the Bible? Is there a favorite story? Is there a favorite verse? Is there something that is just your go-to, written on your heart? This gets me through it.
I suppose if I was to pick something, it would be either Psalm 23 or I think 31, but 23 is the most common one. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, we do that by faith, It's hard sometimes. We've had sometimes when we run out of money before we run out of month, and somehow the bills have always gotten paid. Somehow God's always come through.
Is there something that you're holding as truth right now that you learned the hard way? Some would argue that's the only way we learn.
I would agree that those lessons are the ones that are the most deeply imprinted. Yeah, I have a tendency, I told you earlier, I kind of stir the pot sometimes. And I've been in a couple of situations where I see something that to me wasn't consistent with Scripture. And I can remember an incident. Sharon and I were at a home Bible study, and there were probably about 20 people there. It was a pretty good size. And they were reading a book written by somebody who was a chaplain in the Civil War. And he was very legalistic. He was, if you want God to answer your prayers, you have to do this. And if you got this or that in your life, God's not going to hear you. You need to go get it right before you come back to God. And I just kind of sat boiling and bubbling. And finally, I just kind of exploded. And it was like, are you kidding me? And I just kind of went off. And this author happened to be the favorite author of the guy who was leading the Bible study. And the next week I received a letter from him in the mail and another letter from the people who were hosting it was their home that the meeting was in. And it was kind of like, we love you, you're a brother, but maybe it'd be better if you found a different home group to go to if you're uncomfortable with us. And I was content to do that. I said, well, okay, I know I'm not wrong. This teaching just drives me crazy. You can't earn it. You don't deserve it. God loves you, and Sharon came up to me and said, nope, you're going back. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. You're going back. and God really, Sharon gave me the push and, gave me, I knew she was right. And so we went back the next week and asked him to forgive me. And I sensed even, and this is not to pat myself on the back, but I sensed that there were things that they were mad at me for that I really didn't even do. Just they read that into what I'd said. So I even asked him to forgive me for things that I knew I didn't do, because I knew that it was important. And that was another one of these hinge moments you talk about it, because from that blow up, from that explosion, a lot of those people in the group are still very close. You know, we've maintained a relationship over the years, and gotten past the division and gotten past the legalism as well. So, you know, God's able to defend himself just fine. He doesn't need me.
Well, hey, we all have these truths that we all have these teachings that kind of drive us crazy. And Tyler and I recently were talking about this idea of people walking around declaring their truth, right? This idea of my truth, and well, that's my truth, and you have your truth. What say ye to that?
Well, I do think there are absolutes. You know, I can remember a song lyric, you know, when the truth is found, I hope it'll be true to you. And that's just what you're talking about. But you know, God sets a standard, and he helps us to meet that standard. The standards that we set are just not attainable for a lot of times. I can remember recently somebody asked me, well, you've been married for, this was a few years ago, you've been married for 25 years. What advice would you give somebody? And I told them, I said, well, I'd tell you to lower your standards. And later on, I was able to fill in the blanks and say, you know, what the tendency that we have is we expect other people to have what we're going to need, and they don't have it to give us. You know, there's a lot of stuff that I need that Sharon is not equipped to give me. She can walk through it with me, but if I'm looking to her to meet that need and not to the Lord, it's just not going to work. It's too much for her to bear. And so we seek the Lord together on it. And so setting a standard, more often than not, there'll be situations where somebody will explain where they're at, and I'll say, or I'll hear somebody say, well, how's that working for you? And the light will come on. Oh, gee, not too well, you know. when you're buried in a hole, quit digging.
Yeah, rule one, right? Quit digging.
Exactly. So what I try to do is point people to the truth. You know, hey, this is my opinion, and this is why I have this. You know, consider it, roll it around in your head a little bit, because the Holy Spirit's our teacher. You know, we put in the time, but unless God reveals it, doesn't happen. You know, he asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You're the Christ. You're the Messiah." And Jesus said, "Flesh and blood haven't revealed that to you, but my Father in heaven." So that's what happened the night I used the term saved. The night that I got saved was God flipped a switch in my heart, and all of the things that people had been doing, the seeds that people had been planting over the years. So that is the truth. Stuff that I had flat rejected, and all of a sudden it made sense.
Michael, you mentioned at the beginning when we first sat down together, you mentioned that you felt like you had a pretty rich life, and I'm curious if you could paint a picture for Mike and I of a time in your life when, if you think back in your mind's eye, where you felt like this is it, I'm rich.
Well, I think I began feeling it pretty close to the time that I retired. Excuse me, I'm going to reach for a hanky here. The smoke has bothered me a bit. My dad didn't, you know, he kind of lived on his Social Security and a pension he got from the Army. And you wouldn't consider him wealthy by today's standards, you know, his bank account wasn't fat. But he had a rich relationship with different friends, and that's really, to me, when I see the relationships that I've been able to make through different things, that's more valuable to me than having a 401k. And I'm grateful that God has provided financially, allowing me to retire. No, excuse me. Because I know people my age who can't afford to retire, and my heart breaks for them. But that's not what makes me wealthy. But what makes me wealthy is the relationships that I've been able to build over the years. And when you see people that you haven't seen for a long time, and you're able to just pick right up where you left off, that to me is wealth.
One of the many things that I admire about you from the conversation tonight is you talked a lot about the importance of relationships when it comes to religion, right? You said it's relationships, not religion.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And then you talk about the depth of the relationships that you have with friends and those people that you've interacted with. And I can just I feel that from you, and I appreciate those lessons taught for sure.
Michael, was it your dad that was World War II?
Yes.
And you talked about him being in an internment camp.
Yeah, he was captured at Corregidor in the Philippines and survived a death march, was put in a transport ship and worked in a coal mine in Japan someplace for the duration of the war until the Japanese surrendered. When he came back, I think they said he weighed 85 pounds and came back to the United States. He survived a death march. Maybe you remember the movie, I think it's called Unbroken, about
Louis Zamperini.
Yeah.
I think
incredible book.
Well, Dad didn't talk about it much. I remember 2 or 3 things that he told me over his whole lifetime that I know him. So my whole lifetime with him. And all of the things that he mentioned were in the movie. I didn't read the book. I saw the movie. And so I feel like Dad was pretty much in that last prison camp, the coal mine. And I told you that my dad, on weekends it was going to baseball games and stuff. Whenever they played the national anthem, everybody would stand up, Dad would take up his hat, and he'd begin to weep. In every baseball game we ever went to, every sporting event that we went to, every event where they began with the national anthem, my dad would stand up and weep. And he became a Christian the last few years of his life. And when he'd go to church, he'd walk in the door and he'd begin to weep, and he wouldn't stop weeping until he left. That broke my heart, because I knew that there were things that God was willing to heal, the brokenness that he felt. And nobody in the fellowship that he was going to stepped up and helped him. And that marked me. So, when I see somebody that's by themselves, when I see somebody that I know is dealing with something, I just make it a point. Just make it a point to say something. Just make it a point to acknowledge them. And that's something that I learned from my dad. He was not a bit bitter or racist. He didn't have any problem with Asian people. He didn't have any problem with anybody. He was a gentle man and a good man. He had his faults, to be sure, but there were the lessons that I learned from him about compassion and forgiveness. My mom was just the opposite. She was bitter. She was unforgiving. She was an alcoholic, and she smoked and drank herself to death. So my dad died of a skin cancer, which is probably the result of working out in the sun without any covering, in the internment camp. But as far as being a gentle man, I really respect him for that.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is just because when you were sharing your work with the incarcerated youth, you talked about the importance of overcoming that bitterness. Mm-hmm. Right? And how that bitterness will taint all your relationships, and that's the domino effect. And I marvel that he wasn't bitter coming home, right? I mean, I've read Unbroken, and I'm feeling bitterness as I'm reading Louis Zamperini's story and his experience. You know,
Absolutely.
and I'm just wondering what gift of the Spirit did he have, right? Where he can go through and endure these things. You know, and you said he becomes Christian later on in life. So he's doing these things. He's coming home broken, but he's not bitter.
Right. And I have
That is
no
remarkable.
idea. It is. It is. It's something that I marvel over to this day.
But I think too that, you know, Tyler, we've talked about the importance, man. It's not necessarily about doing it right. It's about getting it right. And so much of the work about living a rich life is like, when you messed up, you got to go back to where you messed up, right? That's why, you know, the spirit of repentance and daily repentance and joyfully repenting, because we have faith in Jesus Christ, and that price has been paid. But if we don't go back and do it, the numbers, you know, it's like we're doing math and it's a 10-step problem and we screwed up on the first step and we're wondering why we don't have the right answer. It's like, you got to go back every once in a while. This is a dorky analogy, Tyler, so bear with me. But every once in a while, I'm typing. I'd go to jump on my computer and I type, and my hands land on the wrong row.
Yeah.
And I'm going through the motions of typing, and it's gibberish on the page, right? Like I'm not set right. So no matter what efforts I'm putting forth, it's not gonna work until you get it right. And so many of us are like, no, I'll just work harder. No, I'll just grind through. It's like your relationships will suffer because you got to go back with the Lord's help. You got to go back and fix it, right? And that's hard work. Easy to say.
It is. That's one of those situations where sometimes you get to the point where the Lord says, "How's that working for you, son?"
Right.
It's kind of hard to kick against the pricks, right?
That's
It
right.
is. It is.
Well, this has been a blast, Michael, and I've enjoyed spending time with you. And you know, one of the things that you know, we've kind of throughout how long have we been doing this, Mike? 100 and 200 and
we're coming up on 120, man.
There we go. We're doing. We've been at it for a little while, and you know, one of the things that we do every episode is we end every episode with the same question, and so to you, Michael, I would ask you, what does it mean to you to be considered the richest man in town?
To the people that it's an honor. It's an honor for me that someone would do that. You know, when Derek calls me Pops, and you mentioned Andy. Andy's one of my sons as well. And when I get that kind of a greeting, I'm just grateful that I was in a position to take advantage of that, and that I was obedient to step into it. It's really it just humbles me. It just humbles me that people would think that.
Well, you know what's interesting, Michael, is that we've spent a little bit of time together tonight. I certainly appreciate you and appreciate the lessons that you've imparted to Mike and I. And the cool thing about this little podcast that we have that goes out to a lot of different countries and a lot of different people listen to it. And I think there's going to be a lot of different people that are going to be grateful for the words that you shared with them tonight. And so for that, I express my gratitude and my appreciation to you for being who you are. And I can tell you, Michael, I can tell that you carry peace, and I appreciate that. So,
well, thank you so much. Thank you. It was easier than I thought it was going to be.
Well, we had fun, Michael. We appreciate you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
You have a great night, okay?
I'll do it. You too.
Good night.
Good night.
Good idea, Ernie. A toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town.